We're good to go.
Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to the October 8th meeting of the Measure Z Advisory Committee. We do have a quorum present. I would like to just indicate a couple of considerations. For many of us, this is our first effort at Zoom, so we will do our best to be transparent and direct with everybody, but just understand that this platform is not familiar to all of us, so please show some consideration in that regard. If you would join me in the salute to the flag, I do have a very miniature version here that we can all deal with. So I pledge allegiance to the flag,
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thanks for the flag, Glenn.
Well, that's kind of a
Thank
minor.
you. Thank you.
Are there any requests for modifications to the agenda? I see none. Just to make this go a little smoother, I have pretty good full frame of most of your shoulders and up, but if you're raising your hand to be recognized, just please make sure it comes up into the frame so that the rest of us can see it. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Ryan, do we have any indication that there are any public members in attendance?
We have 4 members of the public right now, and I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, maybe we'll give them 15, 20 seconds. So any members of the public who would like to raise an issue not on today's agenda, now would be the time to indicate so.
Let me just type in how to raise your hand on the computer. Still no indication.
Okay, seeing no public comment on non-agenda items, we'll move on to our item D, discussion items. First of all, as you can see, we have a new member joining us. Mr. Morgan has taken a seat on the committee as an alternate. And my understanding is that Supervisor Madrone has, I guess, advanced is a fair word, Scott into a voting position. I've lost Scott off of my video, so I don't know what. Oh, there he is in the top corner. You just moved. Your face looked like it was frozen, so I wasn't sure if you were still or not. So in any case, Mr. Morgan, first of all, we'd like to welcome you to the committee. I hope you have, some sense of historically what we've been doing and our goals. But would you like to just briefly introduce yourself and indicate your interest and how you came to be here?
Yes, my name is Eddie Morgan. I can see there's a couple of people in this group that know me already from different circles. I've been married for 24 years with my wife, Sue McIntyre. We own a business in Old Town on 2nd Street. I'm a military veteran, served over 20 years, and I've served on different committees for Humboldt County. I was a liaison officer in a lot of other countries and saw how they did affairs, and that's made me want to do good in my own country, and so that's why I'm very motivated to help here. So that's what I'm about.
Well, we certainly welcome you. Just by way of process and so on, as an alternate, the committee has always taken the posture that the alternates are fully included in all of the discussion items and are able to advance any viewpoint or thought process they like. As you well know, as an alternate, you would only vote if it was required to make the quorum count, which would not be the case today. But at least during my tenure, I guess, which is the duration of the committee, we've always encouraged the alternates to be as active as they want to be. There's certainly no, I spent 4 years as an alternate myself, and I would hope you would be as full-throated as you feel appropriate given the circumstances.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next item would be approval of the minutes of the March 12th, 2020 meeting. They were included as an attachment to the agenda documents. Has everybody had a chance to review them, and are there any requests for modifications? Mr. Robertson, did you wish to?
I shook my head to indicate no adjustments, and I'd make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Robertson to approve the March 12th, 2020 minutes as presented. Is there a second?
A second.
Multiple seconds. Any discussion? Any public comment on the minutes or action summary as it's titled?
Briefly, Chair Zemer, for any of those who might be watching, just to be sure they know the process, Alt-Y will raise your hand for public comment. And for those who are calling in, *9 will indicate they would like to make comment. And also, I see that Nicholas Cole has just joined us, and I am hearing from Ernie. He's having some trouble getting in, but I asked Ryan if he could help him out with that. So he should hopefully be on shortly as well.
Okay. I have Nicholas identified as Sheriff Hansel, and then I have presumably a Sheriff's Office staff member now filling another box that is labeled Sheriff Hansel.
Yep, that's what I have.
That's what I reflect as well. That's Stephanie Suter at the bottom who just joined. She is our staff member here to help me with recording the meeting. Nicholas Cole's been updated. Ryan, are you the one updating those?
Oh, I am attempting to. Sorry, I'm having a remote in. So
Stephanie should be updated in just one moment. That's interesting that they came in as the sheriff.
Okay.
I got clones out there. Watch out.
Who's the Phil, my friend?
He's just hustling votes for next meeting, next year.
That's the way it gets.
Okay. Ryan, do you have any indication any of the public wishes to comment on the motion to approve the action summary? I'm not seeing anything in the chat lines.
I don't see anything.
Okay. On the assumption that we have no public desire to comment on the approval of the action summary, the chair would entertain a motion to approve.
I thought we had a motion.
Which we have in a second. I'm sorry, my apologies. Any discussion on part of the committee?
No.
All those in favor signify by, I guess, saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay, the chair would indicate that the motion was approved as submitted. Next item is an update on the 2019-2020 actuals and the 2021 adopted budget. So Alicia, would you like to begin?
I will, yes, and I'll share my screen if that's okay. Ryan, can you please enable share screen?
Yes.
Sharing? Thank you. Bear with me one moment. My initial disclaimer on these numbers that I'll throw out there, thank you, Ryan, while I'm waiting for that, is that the year has not yet closed. So I did have to do some back end. Can everybody see my worksheet here?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. I had to do some back end Excel tracking, and that means I can only track what I know about. So these numbers are my best guess and estimate at this point in time. But I suspect that these will definitely change as we work through the close of the year, which is hopeful to happen this month. And then at the next meeting, I can bring to your committee the actuals. So this first set of data is for the 19-20 year. This is in the format that your committee should be familiar in reviewing. This is how I typically present it. For the revenues, we surprisingly came in over budget. We had 10.9 million budgeted and revenues came in at 11.2 million. This was great news considering COVID. When in March, when we went to the board, actually in May, we went to the board with a third quarter report after the onset of COVID. We were predicting a grim outlook, actually expecting a $2.5 million shortfall in Measure Z. So this was great news. Sales tax, it also came in well, which is of course the sort of sister cousin to Measure Z. They're both driven by the same data. And the reason why these have come in so well is in part due to the Wayfair decision, which allows for the county to be the beneficiary of online sales tax revenues. And also due to all of us who took our time in quarantine to fix up our houses and do home renovation projects. We saw an incredible incline in revenues for stores like Pearson's and the modification stores and gardening stores, things of those sorts. So that was great news to have that come in $269,000 over budget. For the outside agencies, 4.1 million was the adjusted budget after some carry forward adjustments were made, and currently we're estimating 3.7 of that to be expended, potentially offering up a savings of 401,000. Down here, we list each of the internal departments, with the public defender potentially giving back $2,500, DHHS Measure Z giving back 108,000, district attorney 114,000, probation 121, and the sheriff potentially giving back 156,000. And then public works 224,000. Again, these are rough estimates at this point in time and are certainly subject to change. I am aware of about 309,000 in carry forward funding requests that will be going to the board at the first quarter, which is likely to take place in December, but is again contingent on the closing of the year. So if the data here before you rings somewhat to be true, there should be about $884,000 left unspent in the current fiscal year. Moving over to next fiscal year, the projected revenues are 9.4 million. I can say that we've received 3 payments thus far this year, and those payments exceed the same 3 payments we received last year by about $500,000. So that's optimistic. And again, showing that COVID is not having a severe impact to sales tax revenues. Of course, my caveat to that is we are out of COVID yet. There are some speculations that in the fall there'll be another surge. We could very well see businesses going back into a closed setting, and this go round, if that were to occur, there, you know, the rumor on the streets is there's many businesses that may not be able to withstand another closure. So a second surge could have more drastic impacts on revenues. And we continue to monitor these very, very closely at this point in time, but are pleasantly surprised to see what we have seen so far. As for all of the other departments.
Alicia,
Yes,
could
sir.
you go back one page for a minute, please?
Over here to 1920.
Yeah, and down to the $800, the 800. Okay. I just wanted to get that correct number. 884.
Okay. Don't hold me to it though, Rich. That's my caveat.
No, I'm holding you to it.
All right. Okay, so for the 1920 year, we brought your committee's recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on April 14th, I believe the date was, and they went exactly with your recommendations. They made no modifications to those. As you recall, your recommendations to the board prioritized from 1 through, I think it was 30 or 40 applications, 30 that were deemed as fund worthy, I guess you would say. And so when I go back to the board to present any additional revenues that may be available for allocation, I will guide the board towards your additional recommendations and encourage them to move down through the list in the prioritization level that has already been set by your committee. And the budget for 2021 did propose a balanced budget. So the expenditures are contingent on the 9.4 million in Measure Z revenues that are currently budgeted. So again, if those come in higher, we're roughly 2 million under what we received last year. So I'm pretty optimistic that those will probably come in higher, but I would like to continue tracking it and monitoring it throughout COVID before I can lay any strong assurances on that. But it does look like there may be some revenues available for additional projects. I do also want to say that your committee knows that I tend to be a conservative budgeteer. And this year in particular, I will really stress that with the board. So I will probably err on the side of caution in being overly conservative this year, which means there will be potentially, extra revenues available in the 2021 year, 21-22 year, excuse me. That is all I have to say about that. Is there any questions from the committee? And may I stop my screen share?
Before you lose the screen share, can you just scroll down the page so we can see the bottom of the 2020?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Thanks.
So again, as I said, it's a balanced budget. So the expenditures equal the revenues that are anticipated, leaving a net zero available for allocation, only because I haven't made any adjustments yet for the 1920 year, and won't do that until we have the year closed and those numbers have been finalized.
Okay. Just trying to kind of quantify this in my mind. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but if you look at the 1920 and 2021 document, do the percentages of increases that are reflected there align with the expenditure projections on the worksheet that was produced by the task force?
Correct. Yes. Yes. When we brought the budget to, when we brought the 10-year projections to the board, which took place on April 14th, we were pretty well honed in on what the Measure Z budget unit would look like at that point in time. So we added that data in, and then we made long-term projections based off of what we know to be true with salaries, benefits, and utilizing Hinderleader Delamis and Associates, who is our sales tax revenue expert and industry leader in helping us to forecast future revenue projections.
Okay, maybe I'm slow here, so be patient with me. You show expenses in the 2021 document of 11, I can't remember, 11,433 or 11,4, let's just say. On the worksheet that came from the task force group, the total expenditure is shown as 7,888,000. Can you explain the differential?
Yes, because the task force only evaluated ongoing salaries. They did not evaluate outside
services
funded.
And supplies.
Exactly. So you have 3.1 million in funding that's going to outside projects.
Okay, apparently I didn't phrase my question correctly. The worksheet that came from the task force shows only salaries directly and salary related expenses. It does not show services and supplies, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, I take that back, Glenn. It
shows services and supplies in a very small amount.
Yes.
I guess my question is, the worksheet from the task force group projects, and I understand this was done, back, I don't know, 6 months ago or whatever, that the total expenditures would be 7,888,000 for the in-county portion of the fund, correct?
Correct.
And it shows of that 609,000 is services and supplies. Okay. Correct. Your 2021 budget document that we just looked at is 11,400,000.
It was 11,083,000. So okay. Just barely over 11, and 3.1 million of that is associated to outside projects.
Okay, so that assumes some sort of continuation of the already granted, say for the MISS program in Eureka and the school resource officers and so on. So it assumes continuation at the 1920 levels for those projects?
No, the 2021 budget has been adopted. Those are solid numbers.
They are.
There's no assumptions. Those have been awarded.
Okay.
3.2 million has been awarded to outside agencies.
Okay, and barring any disaster, as you said in your presentation, you assume that lacking any really dramatic change, that those would be funded at their full level.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Rich.
Sure.
Going back to the number that I wanted to see, the 884,000. Didn't we have a discussion on that a year or two ago that if there was an excess money left over, we were going to give it to the fire and sheriff department down here at
No,
884.
I think,
Thought I was going to roads.
yeah, I was gonna say
County
that
roads,
Roads.
county roads.
Oh, it's
Uh,
going to roads. So I just remember it was spoken for. That's all.
the committee, as you recall, went through a ranking process, and we ranked a number of projects that were not actually funded. And we have always requested to the Board of Supervisors that were there to be funding beyond that was assumed and realized ultimately when the final numbers were in, that they would continue on down our list based on the ranking that we had established back in early March. My understanding is historically they have generally done that, and my assumption would be that they would continue to do that. Alicia, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, so the roads was, the extra funding to go to roads was actually your committee's recommendation in the 18-19 year, or maybe it was the 19-20 year. We're referring to the 2021 year. I believe you can see on my screen your committee's letter of recommendations to the board. So 1, 2, 3, all the way down through a portion of 7 have been funded and approved and are included in the adopted budget. When we got to 6, we had $103,000 left. So that 103 went here to the Fortuna Police Department for their drug task force officer. So next in line, if any additional funding were to become available, the recommendations I would make to the Board of Supervisors would be to follow this letter of recommendation, giving the remaining funding to the Fortuna Fire, and then continuing to move down through this recommendation list. You can see here, just going through the top couple, that Rio Dell is next in line, then the county IT system for the radio infrastructure project, Public Works for road resurfacing, City of Trinidad for their deputy, and so on and so forth.
So that's the 884.
Yeah, the 884 would presumably be used by the time you got through number 10 on that list.
Yes, right.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members?
To be clear, that 884 is not included in the in a rollover amount into the next fiscal year.
That is correct, because these are just my estimations at this point in time. We have not closed the books on the year yet. And so these numbers are subject to change until such time as the year has closed. Then I will have those final dollar amounts, and I would present those to the Board of Supervisors at the first quarter budget meeting that will likely take place in December. We haven't scheduled that date yet because we are so highly contingent on the closing of the year.
And then just to follow that through, all monies that have been returned by other agencies will be used up through that process. So there will not be a carryover amount moving forward.
There is, so far, the carry forward requests that I have received total 309,000, and those have already been deducted from the estimations of what could be available for other projects. So the 884 does not include any potential carry forwards.
Okay.
That would be the full amount that may be available for allocation.
Thank you.
Any other questions of committee members regarding the staff report? Ryan, do we have any public members who are interested in speaking to this? I do not see anything in the chat section.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. All right. So I guess I'll just, for the process, I'll call for any public comment on the discussion regarding the 1920 and 2021 fiscal review. Seeing none.
Yeah.
We'll move forward then. We go to D4, which is the review of ongoing Measure Z salary and benefit expense. As the committee may recall, back in September last year, we had a discussion, and I was directed to forward a letter to the Board of Supervisors about a concern that we had regarding the escalation of the in-county salary and benefit costs and how they would affect our capability to ultimately distribute money outside the county. That letter resulted in the creation by the Board of Supervisors of, I guess I'll call it a task force or a working group that was basically comprised of those county departments who were recipients of the Measure Z funding. And they were tasked, to my understanding, with trying to project into the future what their share of the fund would be, given the knowledge that exists now about their salary and roll-up costs. So that document was created and was distributed to us last April, and we've had it available to us. So perhaps maybe, Alicia, you could just go over the process a little bit and explain to us how we came to this document, and then we can discuss the document in specifics.
Sure. So again, I've shared the screen. You should see that document here on your screen. The projected 2021 totals, again, were developed in late March, early April. And at this point in time, we had pretty solid numbers for the ongoing Measure Z costs for the 2021 year. So these are reflective of what has been budgeted. In this table, you can see the revenues are at the top, and we actually, this number, this 10.9 million here, we did drop that down based off of COVID. So that in particular has changed. And as we move through the year, we will refine that as part of the recommendations that came from the working group. But that is the one data set that has changed from when this came to the board in April. So the revenues are projected out. Underneath of there, you can see the assumptions that were made in terms of the growth, and they are fairly conservative assumptions. And these are come at recommendation of Hinderleader, Delamas and Associates, who are our consultants who help us to track and manage sales tax revenues. And they also do the same for Measure Z and have developed these assumptions going forward into the future based off of the data and knowledge that they have as industry leaders. Underneath is the expenditures, starting with the salaries and wages, giving a 3% increase. At this point in time, all of our bargaining units are nearing the end of their contract terms with no estimated COLAs on the horizon. However, we are going into new bargaining negotiations, and so that will be data as far as what future COLA increases or pay adjustments into the future. We will have further information on that likely next year, later this year. But a 3% assumption is presumed across the years for increases in salaries and wages. Next is the health insurance. Trending out in the past, health insurance tends to rise by about 6% annually. In order to be conservative on that, we have 6% in the current year and then drop that down. And this is based off of information provided to us through our Human Resources Department. Next is retirement. That data is driven through estimations from our CalPERS annual evaluations, and starts off with an increase of 11.8% and then levies out based off of changes that are coming through the CalPERS programs. And then lastly is services and supplies. And this is the minimal amount required to support the staffing with a 1.5% increase in the coming years. So for the first year, there's a 3.1 million excess. That's what your committee has made recommendations on this year and the board has adopted for allocation to the outside agencies. And at the end of the 10-year term reflects an leftover balance annually from the revenues of 1.8 million. So this reflects that at this point in time, over the 10-year span, it appears as if the revenues will grow in such a manner that is sufficient for meeting the expenditures and still leaving a balance available for your committee to make recommendations on, albeit a declining balance. On December 10th, the working group comprised of the sheriff, the chief probation officer, and the district attorney met with staff from our office to discuss these figures and develop recommendations for the Board of Supervisors. Those recommendations came to the board on April 14th. And the recommendations provided that those three departments would commit to moving vacancies to Measure Z positions when possible to allow for excess revenues or excess funds to be available at the end of the year for allocation in future years. They committed to staffing Measure Z positions with low step employees, committed to moving positions likely to accrue overtime out of Measure Z to ensure that those additional expenditures were not a burden of Measure Z, to capping Measure Z personnel allocations at the current levels. So they would not make any new staffing requests from county departments for the foreseeable future. And finally, providing an annual Measure Z forecast and update to the board. So this will be a process that I will incorporate into our April board meeting when we bring your committee's recommendations to the board to project out 10 years annually and capturing any significant changes that take place, such as COVID. Additionally, the work group presented an alternate mechanism of capping the salaries where they were, although they could not recommend that that action be taken to the Board of Supervisors. It was presented in case the Board of Supervisors chose to enact that. However, the board did not agree to capping the salaries where they are now, and opted to accept the working group's recommendations moving forward. Are there any questions on that?
I do have a couple. In the first 5 years of the projection, the average assumed change is 1%, but in the last 5 years, it increases significantly and goes up to about 2.6% average. What does your consultant feel is going to happen in the second 5 years to show a 250% increase in the change in the revenue?
Well, it's not a 250% increase. It's a 1.5% increase.
No, I mean, comparatively.
Yes, what this takes into consideration is the fact that when we were developing this in going into the 11th year of economic growth and anticipating that a recession was bound and determined to come barreling down the pike at some point in time. So the first years have a more modest growth increase, assuming that a recession was going to begin. Economists were, prior to COVID, anticipating that this recession would be a fairly modest one, and we're not expecting anything super extreme. And then recovery from that recession beginning to take place in the 25-26 year and picking up there on out.
Okay, thank you. In regards to the retirement, am I correct in my belief that the already existing unfunded liabilities are amortized now out to between 2035 and 2040? So the capability of the county to take that element of the retirement contribution out of the equation doesn't exist until after the time frame that's dealt with in the spreadsheet?
I think I understand your question in that, yes, we are entering a 20-year repayment cycle on the unfunded liability. So that does extend beyond this time frame.
Okay, so given that, why do we see the decline in the assumption about the retirement change?
Because the retirements are expected to stabilize in the coming years. Because of changes that have taken place at CalPERS, CalPERS has reduced their discount rates, knowing that they have not historically met their return on investments that they had anticipated. So they have scaled that back 0.5% each year, taking place over 3 or 4 years, I believe it is. And so that effort has helped to stabilize pension costs in the coming years.
Okay, thank you.
Anticipated. Of course, we all.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I love projecting out 10 years, but it's my experience that rarely hit the mark on your current year and maybe on the next year, but once you hit about 3 and 4 years, it's really a estimate and a guessing game at that point in time.
Yeah, I would certainly concur that 10-year crystal ball is pretty cloudy at least.
Yeah.
The reason I think it's valuable nonetheless to illustrate, but also I just did a little quick calculation myself. If you assume the correction that you've talked about in your other documents and you correct the 10,994 measure Z-tax down to the 9.7 that, you know, was your preliminary number in your other budget, and then you just assume a flat 1% across the period of the time, by the time you get to that 10-year period, the fund is actually upside down. It loses enough of the, you know, multiplication effect and so on, that you in fact don't even have enough money to cover the expenditures of the in-county department. So like I said, I understand that this is voodoo to some degree, but the choice of assumptions is a critical factor, because you can, over a 10-year period, especially with the multiplication effect, you can radically change the outcome. So it's kind of an illustrative exercise, I guess, and we certainly appreciate the county undertaking it. Whether or not we all agree with the assumptions may be another circumstance. Any other committee members have any questions or want to clarify?
If I could just add one comment to that, Chair Zemer, is that part of the working group's recommendations was for us to go through this exercise annually from here on out. So we will be updating this, and that will help us to promptly identify if a situation does arise that begins to create a problem.
Okay. Any questions or clarifications from committee members?
I have a question.
Mr. Robertson.
Alicia, the cap is obviously illustrative. Were there any projections made on what the task force did commit to as far as vacancies, give backs, etc.? Because that seems more feasible, and also what the board is going to did recommend.
We did not do any projections on that, because frankly, anticipating a vacancy rate and employee steps and the capabilities of adhering to the task force recommendations is impossible, probably at best.
Sure.
And also these recommendations in large part only offer up one-time savings to ensure that in the following fiscal year that there is money going back to your committee, which has historically been the trend, that there's always additional money to go into the pot, so to speak. So this was an effort in the working group to ensure that they were minimizing the impacts based off of the current staffing ratios as best as possible on a one-time basis. But going forward, the projections that we did assume the full staffing of each of these departments and do not include any calculations for potential givebacks.
Any other questions or clarifications by committee members? Any member of the public have any questions or clarifications they would like to request? Do we have any public, Ryan? We do not.
No raised hand.
Okay. This was in the form of a report, and I don't know if it was ever even really intended to be an action item. So I guess it was a review, and we received the information, and the committee members can consider what we received. And if they want to discuss it or propose something in the future, that's certainly their option. Next, we go to D5, which is review of the 2021 application and recommendation process and consideration of any process changes needed. Alicia, would you like to speak to Ginger? Go ahead.
Yes, please.
Can I make a recommendation?
Yeah, can I just give my quick little staff
Yeah.
on this, and then I'll pass it off to your committee. So I included in the agenda the prior year's application. You know, right off the bat, I know that we need to update the committee representation, changing Scott Bender to replace Vivina Orcutt's position as the 5th district delegate and adding Eddie Morgan in as the alternate. So just want to acknowledge that those changes will take place in the coming year's application. And then the application is here for any additional modifications that your committee may see as appropriate. As for a recap of last year's process, as a reminder, what your committee did was first evaluate all of the applications on a sort of yes or no. It met the ballot language parameters to distinguish which ones were deemable as fund worthy and which ones were not. From there, you then ranked the applications 1, 2, 3 in order to prioritize them. And then any applications that had an equal prioritization level, you then address those for an additional 1, 2, 3 evaluation so that we could parse those out to put everything in sequential order based off of your committee's prioritization level. You, in addition to that, requested of any agencies for recommendations for reductions that they could offer up themselves. But as your committee opted to not elect for any discretionary decisions on your part as far as partial funding for the remaining applications that had not made cuts to their request. And from there was able to develop the letter of recommendation that I shared with you a little bit ago. So with that, I throw it to your committee to discuss any changes to the application and or any changes to the process in the coming year's evaluations.
Ginger?
So since Glenn and Laura and I actually did the original application process, I would like to have you consider that many of the people that have applied have complained about the little tiny space that they have to write in. It looks on the application like they only have this much space, to write in the answer. So therefore, we've had applications in the past, for those of you who are new, where on every single answer they put see attached, see attached, see attached, which is a little bit annoying to me because, it's like, well then, okay. And some of our applications are like 8, 9 pages long. I actually took one of our applications from last year and I just went through and I crossed out for my own entertainment. I crossed out all the repetitive stuff that they said, and it went from 7 pages to 4. So I really feel like, I've probably submitted more than 250 grants nationally because I did this for AARP Foundation for many years. And I applied for a lot of money, and most grants, and we're not big time or anything, but most grants have a thing where they say, you have you can do this in 3 pages, anything over 3 pages, we're not going to accept your application. I know we aren't going to do that, but that is a common thing that people ask. And I always feel like if you can't say something in 3 pages, then, we don't need to know what time you got up and what you had for breakfast. That's how I think of it. So I'm thinking to make the application itself shorter, to just put in number 3 through 8, which is the actual where we're asking for narrative. Just put those, just one line, next line, next line. Don't leave space. And then number 9, I think it says if you check yes, please explain. That has to do with budgetary type things. And that way, I think we should limit the number of pages that people are able to submit to us, because we could, if it goes from 3 through 8, that's 6 pages. I mean, that's 6 questions. And if we did each one, they get a half a page to answer each question. And to me, that's usually enough information to kind of get the gist of what they want. These applications that are really, really long, and people kind of get lost in the minutia of it all. I think they don't know really how to do it, or they're concerned that they're not giving us enough information, and it gets pretty frantic on one end. And also the people that are trying to be really, really good, they're trying to put all of their information in these tiny little spaces. So I think if we just say this is aside from your budgetary questions, your budget that you're going to submit, if you would just give us, you have 3 pages to answer these 6 questions. That's my suggestion, or 4 pages, but just limit it to the amount of information that and I think it'll make them think more like, okay, I need to really focus on what's really important. And I don't need to give all this background. I don't need to give, future projections unless that's the question. So that's just my, because I've gotten a lot of feedback through the years, like, there's all this little space and it's hard to get it all in there. I say, well, but then it's also annoying to get the application that on every single question, it just says see attached. So I think, well, then, what's the point of having that space at all? That's just my recommendation.
Just for clarification purposes. So under your proposal, they would submit the application with this enlarged response format. And the only attachment that we would consider would be the detailed budget that say delineated their personnel cost or delineated the project cost. Is that correct?
No. So on the application, the first page, the application, they would fill that. But then on number 3, it starts out and it says, describe how the scope of your proposal, blah, 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 blah. And then number 4, please provide a brief description. And then it goes through, through number 9. And then on 10, it says, if you have reoccurring expenses and if your answer is yes, then tell us why. That would be separate because that goes then into the budget. Whoops. Did I lose you? Yeah, see, I just think that we can just from 3, is it 3? I should have written it down. 3 through 9, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 7 questions have narrative. Just say, this is you have 3, we will allow 3 full pages of answers for these questions. Because some of them, they don't even answer it because it has nothing to do with them, or, they'll just write one little thing. But I just think that when they look at this, I know because people have told me this, they think, well, that isn't enough room. So I'll just put C attached. So then every single one of them is C attached. So some of our applications are really long. And, I think for me, I don't need that much length. Maybe all of you do, but I feel like I don't need, especially when I crossed out all the repetitive stuff on a couple of the applications and I reduced it by like 2 full pages, because it was the same stuff they just kept saying over and over. That's all.
Okay. Thoughts of the committee?
Ginger, I would recommend, this is Eddie, I would recommend instead of doing pages, just doing number of words per answer. Working on both sides, I think that's easier for people to get. It's easier for your computer to count the amount of words you have. That would be my recommendation. It's just just put words. How many words per question?
Well, every agency is different. Some of them they want to say more about one particular question because it's relevant to their application. And they might only say a few things about one of the other answers, whereas somebody else, it might be just the opposite. That's why I was just saying, you give them a page. You have 3 pages to answer these 6 questions or whatever. And also, in most applications for, bigger national type applications, they even give you the margins. They say you have to have at least 1.5 inch margin on either side because people will do it end to end, page all the way across the page. So that's just my recommendation. I just think the format is, some people it's frustrating to them because they think they have to fill in that little tiny space. Other people just say, screw it, I'm just gonna say see attached, and then they just send us this huge narrative about their whole entire agency, and then you have to dig through and figure out which question it goes to because they didn't go in some kind of an order. That's just my, when you get 43 applications and you only have 2 weeks or whatever it is we have, you kind of go, so that's all.
Okay, other committee members? Laura?
I'm curious if the CAO staff has received similar comments about the application? That would be for Alicia.
No, I don't think we do receive requests for a Word copy, and then we send a Word copy out. So, you know, we have accommodated in that regards.
I'm glad you do that.
Yeah, I've never had somebody say, or that I can recollect, say like, oh, the box is just so small. And if they had, then we probably say, well, here, let us send you the Word version and then you can edit it. In response to this feedback, we could develop a fillable form that limits the amount of space that they have, but is larger than what's here in order to prevent that, because possibly sending out a Word document does sort of give free rein, or we can put in a notation that 3-page maximum. My only concern with doing the latter is, you know, what are you going to do if somebody sends in 4 pages? You're probably, is it going to disqualify the application? Like, probably not. So I would lean towards, you know, giving them a set amount of space for each question in order to sort of box the applicants in a more strict manner, if that was your committee's desire.
I'm gonna say, I don't think it was to restrict their response. It's just like I said, some agencies, one particular question or 2 particular questions might really be the essence of what they do compared to another agency, you know, and so.
Jim, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In the application, there are the 11 questions, and then the next page says required attachments, which is another description of the previous year's results and a budget. There's a lot of redundancy between those 3 documents and the 11 questions. Why was that added?
Oh, boy.
I don't know.
And why aren't those 3 documents alone sufficient for the application?
I think that was probably not on the original, you know, request. I think, or maybe it was, but I think what we wanted to do is get the gist of what the agency was, what they wanted, and then let them expand a little bit. But what they do is they just do it anyway. They expand anyway. They submit all these pages, and then they go to that one page that you're talking about that says, and now you have another opportunity to say the same thing over. And I agree, you know, it just seems like it is redundant, but I think most agencies that aren't used to filling out applications or grants, they feel like they have to do it because it's on there, and they feel if they don't do it, they're not going to be seen as being a responsible applicant. That's what I think.
Well, I'd be in favor of Alicia's suggestion of having it a big form fillable with a limit, but then I would suggest that there are only 3 required documents, and for the narrative description, you provide the 11 questions as examples of what should be in that narrative.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Is that in the form of a motion?
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to capture the essence of Mr. Robertson's motion? The staff member seemed to have dropped from my display, so I don't know if she's still there.
Looks like she is.
Not from my display.
Yes, I'm here, and I gather the motion to say that we will develop a fillable form. We will refer to the required attachments only as being necessary, but for proposal 1, giving questions 3 through 9 as thought-provoking recommendations.
Yeah.
And the only attachment under your proposal then would be the budget, the detailed budget?
And the prior year's results.
It would be an attach, yes, because the narrative would become then a fillable section that provides only a certain amount of space.
Okay. So does everyone understand the proposal, first of all?
I
Nicholas?
I have a question that I want to put out as pertains to this one. Is that going to include letters of support or letters of recommendation from the public? As we have asked for public comment to limit themselves to one per application in the public comment forum, are we asking applicants to limit letters of recommendation with their application?
Chief Robertson, your thoughts?
I don't think we need to limit that, no.
I agree.
All right, I wanted to put that question out there for clarity.
Okay. So we have a motion to revise the application procedure to essentially limit the quantity of response by making the application a fillable form and then having limited attachments. Is there a second to Chief Robertson's motion?
I second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion by the committee? Are there any logistical or administrative hurdles to the fillable form thing, Ms. Hayes? No.
No, we have a fillable form expert on staff who can help me make this everything your committee has wished for and hoped for.
Okay.
Do they do any side work?
For a nominal fee, they may.
Okay. Any other discussion regarding Mr. Robertson's motion?
Other than one comment, I think that's great because a lot of the applicants, or at least many applicants, filled their forms out by hand, and sometimes handwriting is really hard to read. So
Okay.
I think this is a positive step.
Okay. Just for my own understanding, if we're using a fillable form, presumably we're forcing any applicant then to utilize that format and not use an analog or a handwritten document. Is that correct?
Oh, gosh.
They would likely still be able to print it and handwrite in the amount of space that's provided through the fillable form, because when you print it, it will still give you that space allocation, just less like counting words or something of that sort. I don't know that we can necessarily prevent that 100%, but we could certainly make a notation on here that it's the committee's preference that it be a typed document.
Okay. Yes, Ernie.
Could we put somewhere in the instructions that they get extra credit for brevity or something that might encourage them to stick to the little boxes?
If it's fillable, that becomes a moot point, really.
That's your old teacher coming out in you, Ernie.
Okay, any other concerns or consideration amongst the committee with the motion? Any public comment on the motion? Do we have any public, Ryan?
No public comment at this time.
No public comment. Okay, so seeing no public comment, I would call for a vote on Chief Robertson's motion that we revise the application to streamline the administrative functions via completion of a fillable form with limited attachments. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Were you able, Stephanie, were you able to count hands there?
I think, do we have anyone opposed? Let's go there.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries unanimously then. So any clarifications needed by staff, or do you have a clear understanding of our intent?
I think I've got it. I've got it. Yes. And so what I will do is the next item, I think it is on the agenda, is to discuss the meeting schedule. So I'll modify this and present it to your committee at the next meeting, which will be the meeting to take place immediately before release of the application in January.
Okay. All right, moving on. Item D6, the proposed 21-22 meeting schedule.
So yes, perfect segue into that. I would propose the next meeting to take place in December or early January. Again, I would I would anticipate bringing a first quarter budget report to the board in early December, but I am sort of at the mercy of the year-end closing. So it's a bit delayed at this point. So I can't guarantee that, but in the month of December would be my hope for bringing that to the board. So maybe an early January meeting would be a good time for this committee to get together to evaluate the data presented to the board at first quarter and to review the final application prior to release. I think we released the application right around the second to third week of January.
I think it said the 17th
and then
on the top of this.
So you'd be talking January 7th or 14th then of 2021?
Yes.
Thoughts of the committee members?
Yeah, we may be past the COVID crisis by then. We may be able to meet in person. Also, January is a less busy month, so it's kind of ideal.
Okay. Is the 7th or the 14th more advantageous for the staff, Alicia?
The 7th works for me. I think the only advantage to doing it sooner rather than later is to get the application out. I think I heard Ginger say she saw the 17th
I don't know,
on
maybe I'm wrong.
February 17th was when it was due.
But I think they had
frankly,
we had 30 days or something.
it's usually right around a month. So if we had the meeting on the 7th, I could release the application on the 11th if your committee is available on the 7th.
Everybody have availability on January 7th?
Yes, yes.
Okay, let's go with January 7th as our initial meeting then.
And still sticking with the 2 p.m. time frame, correct?
That's my thought. Has that become inconvenient for anyone?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, and then the historical trends is for the application to be due, the deadline to be mid-February. That gives us about a week and a half, 2 weeks to process. The application of processing is a significant lift for our office. So allowing a decent amount of time in there is valuable to us. And then your committee has tended to schedule tentative meetings for each Thursday in the month of March. We have 4 Thursdays that month. That would be the 4th, 11th, 18th, and 25th. This year, the 2021 year, your committee was incredibly efficient at evaluating the applications, and I think you were able to cancel the last 2. But I would propose holding each of those March Thursdays for your review process.
Okay, thoughts of the committee members?
Sounds good.
Any public comment? No public still, Ryan? Okay, seeing no public comment. So we would then have a organizational and meeting on January 7th to review the revised application. Theoretically, the staff would release it to the applicants on the 11th of January. And then they would have February to accumulate, process, and prepare the applications, and we would have a tentative meeting date of all 4 Thursdays in the month of March. Is that acceptable to everyone? I'm seeing lots of nods. Anybody have a problem with that schedule? Okay, I would think that should work, Ms. Hayes.
Okay. And then the final meeting of the year being the same meeting that is being conducted right now. We had this meeting scheduled for September because of the close of the year. We pushed it out to October. We're still not quite there yet. And this has been a 2-year trend in having our year close later than is typical for our agency. So I'm thinking that maybe this meeting to take place the first Tuesday in November, if that works for your committee. And so that would be November 4th of 2021 for the final year-end meeting.
Thoughts of
2021? 21?
Correct.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Any
As
thoughts?
opposed to where it was scheduled this year in September?
Exactly.
Okay, I got you.
That's not a
and then
holiday, is it?
postponed to today's date. So that meeting schedule, just to reiterate, is January 7th, March 4th, 11th, 18th, and 25th, and then November 4th. This follows suit with what's typical of your committee. But if anybody would like to have extra meetings, we could certainly entertain that. Otherwise, a motion to adopt this schedule would be appreciated.
Do we have a motion to approve the schedule as presented?
So moved.
Okay, by Ms. Conzenary, a second.
Second.
Okay, a second by Mr. Ames. Any discussion of committee members?
Oh, I do have a quick question. I know this January 7 is a little early. We usually elect a chair and vice chair in January, but our meetings have usually been later. Will that still be on in January, or will that be for March?
No, I presumably the election of the chair and vice chair would have to happen in the January meeting.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Any public comments on proposed schedule?
None at this time.
Seeing none, I would ask for all those in favor of the proposed 2021 schedule, please indicate by raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. That would complete the agenda as presented. I thank you all for your tolerance of this format. I wish I could share Ernie's optimism, but I think we'll be doing this next November, quite frankly. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions or input, obviously you can reach out to the staff or communicate to each other community members through the staff. Just a quick reminder that the intercommittee member direct communication is not an appropriate thing given the Brown Act. So if you have concerns and so on, if you could forward them to Alicia or any of her designees, and then she can circulate the information as necessary. I saw a hand somewhere and it disappeared. Ernie?
Yeah, it was me. I just wanted to apologize for being a late sign in. We don't all have perfect internet down here. So somebody sent me a link and it went right through. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Also,
Mr. Cole.
I wanted to make a comment as a citizen, and I didn't have an opportunity again as I was late too because of link issues. And I'm hoping that I can do that at this time.
Certainly.
I wanted to read one of the line items from the ordinance. It is 718-17 regarding the advisory committee. The Board of Supervisors shall no later than March 1st, 2015 establish a resolution, an advisory committee that will make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors as to the expenditures of the funds derived from this tax. That's the only thing I've seen within the ordinance that is guidance to this committee. And I'm concerned that as we're moving forward and looking at the budget realities, that this committee will lose the ability to do that. And I would like us all to be mindful of that as we go forward and consider how we have been doing this and how we choose to do this in the future. And that is something I needed to say in this moment we were all gathered together rather than trying to hold this in my head. And I appreciate your time.
Okay. I have just a question for the staff. We now receive from the staff just essentially a bottom line number of the projected cost for the county departments. And we don't even in fact get a enumeration of the positions and stuff. I shared Member Cole's concerns, and while I'm somewhat mollified by the task force document, it's pretty clear that the numbers, the assumptions can radically change the numbers over a period of time. I mean, I may be in trouble here because this isn't agendized, but it's a generalized discussion. I would like to at least see a delineation of the staff positions that are assumed to be automatically funded. Because right now I have no idea what positions in the sheriff's department we're funding. I have no idea what positions in the DA's office and so on. So the board has made a pretty clear delineation, or I consider their response to us pretty clear, that they thank you very much for your concern, but we don't share it at this point. But nonetheless, I think the committee's minimum level of responsibility is to at least understand what county positions are being funded. So my request would be that, along with the other documents in January, we would at least get a delineation of the actual positions that are being Z funded in each of the departments. So when somebody asks me, who are you funding in the sheriff's department? I don't have to say I have no idea.
I agree with
Yes,
that.
all of this data is available through the budget. The budget contains a very detailed list of position allocations, and it is part of the annual budget process to present that to the board. It's broken down by budget unit. All of the budget units for Measure Z are also gathered into one concise location in the budget narrative. So you can review the budget narrative, which will guide you to what budget units are contained in that, in those particular Measure Z budgets, and then use that information to go forth and evaluate the personnel allocations, which will show you position title, classification, range, and I think it's a 3-year history of those position allocations that have been approved by the Board of Supervisors. You could further follow those ranges to the county's salary schedule to see what that salary range looks like, where it falls in the grand scheme of things. And I would be happy to forward you the links for all of those reference materials.
Okay, that would help.
Can you do that on our Measure Z website?
Yes, we could certainly link it to the Measure Z site, and then I will send it to your emails. Speaking of the emails, just while we're on that subject, the Measure, years ago we set up the Measure Z emails, but I get a lot of feedback that people don't really check that one necessarily all the time. So, but I also don't want to contact you through your private email if that is causes you angst. So if everybody could shoot me an email of what their preferred email communication address is, I can update that to ensure that I adhere to your comfort level in communicating with you.
Okay.
Thank you, Alicia.
Ginger?
I just wanted to wish Nick good luck. Is today your day opening?
It is. I'm only freaking out a little bit.
Okay, time to come to your restaurant. All
Okay.
right.
I thank you all for your time, and thank you for putting up with my limitations on this format. We will see you all January 7th.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you also to Ryan for tutoring me a little bit. The
Yes.
staff has been very supportive, and I certainly appreciate it.
We had coffee together this morning trying to figure this out.
Ryan,
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay, the meeting would be considered adjourned at 3:19. Thank you all. We'll see you in January.
Thank you.
And Ryan can hold sometimes you guys like to speak with me after. So if anybody wants to hang out, Ryan can turn off the public format, and it looks like everybody's bowing out. So I don't think Ryan, is the public format off?
Alicia, just maybe to save you some time,